lifestyle designers. This is Zach here with secretsoflongevity.com. And I'm making this video not as an attack per se on people that choose to follow this dietary ideal, but it's more of just looking at the evidence that we have so far in our history with this, with the people that choose or have chosen to follow this dietary paradigm. So right off the bat, I want to say that anyone that has chosen to follow the path of fruitarianism for whatever reason, whether it's their health or they are wanting to better their health in some way, or they believe it to be the ideal, I'd encourage you to do so, just to explore it for your own health explorations, to have the evidence in front of you and get your experience from it for however many days, weeks, months, or years you happen to do it for. But I think you will benefit from this video just because it will put that information in there, and perhaps someday down the road something will click and you might realize that you've gotten what you need from it, or that you will have overcome certain hurdles and you won't be doing something quite as extreme, and you'll sort of scale back in the amount of dogmatic beliefs you're holding in regards to diet, and you'll sort of loosen up and relax a bit in terms of what you take into your body. By all means, there's been countless number of people that have helped themselves and healed themselves of a wide variety of different diseases, but it goes without saying that there's a large, if not equally large, number of people that have had troubles with it, and has caused them a wide variety of health troubles, from very small things to very drastic things. And the degree to which one holds on to that ideal can dictate whether they're going to be on it some long enough for them to heal from it, or whether they're holding on too long and it's actually causing detriment to their body. As you'll see from this video, I'm going to sort of point out that humans, the human species, has been designed to be a very flexible eater in terms of what we can take in and what we can assimilate. So it is more often than not that you see people flipping from one diet to the other. I mean, if it's happening within very short periods of time, that's obviously not ideal, but people have changes that come through their diet because we're so adaptable to a wide variety of things. If we're too strict and too narrow-minded with what we're taking in as sustenance, then that's when deficiencies or excesses can happen in the long run, or even in the short run if it's too extreme and your specific needs aren't being met, so it can be even on a short scale of time. So I'd first like to point out some of the myths on high-fruit diets, and I'm going to use the term fruitarianism to describe any dietary paradigm that is getting 75% or more of its calories from fruit. So different subgroups will consume various amounts of vegetables, or just greens, or nuts and seeds in small or even slightly larger amounts. There's even some that might include some raw dairy or other things. But basically it's a vegetarian, or even most of the time vegan paradigm, and it's very high in fruit. So when talking about this, I'm going to be describing what can happen from anyone staying within that paradigm of the high fruit diet. So humans way back in time, in terms of the evolutionary record, probably ate a very high fruit diet, got a lot of their calories from fruit. This is talking several millions of years, however. This is looking back to when we were an ape, obviously, which was not necessarily walking on all fours, but much like a chimpanzee. However, we're very far removed from that state now, and that's because of several million years of evolution and a variety of different foods that we've taken in over those several million years, which has resulted in where we are today. But yes, even as this ape, exact species names I'm not familiar with, but it's well known that chimpanzees eat a very large amount of their diet as fruit, perhaps around 80% as fruit, but they do eat a lot of insects as well, and they also hunt for other monkeys, birds, other things that they can catch. And they do this on a fairly infrequent basis, but it's quite well established that that's within all the subgroups of the various sort of different types of chimpanzees. And of course they're eating a lot of greens in the forms of leafy vegetables. And one thing I'd like to point out is that monkeys apes, chimpanzees, and also a wide variety of other animals actively seek out and utilize different plants to use medicinally. So one thing that's quite common among fruitarianism, or even what we could call natural hygiene, or what's come out of natural hygiene, is the complete disregard and fear of supplements, concentrated foods in the forms of superfoods and herbs, saying that these are useless and even harmful to the body, when there's so many different types of animals that do actively seek these out. Chimpanzees will seek out types of garlic when they get a parasite or something going on inside them. That's been documented by people like Jane Goodall. Even types of wild ginger they'll actively seek out, as well as a whole host of other plants. And they recognize these and have learned instinctively and also intuitively and visually from their peers in their groups that these are necessary for their health and the preservation of their health. So back to the idea of where we've come from evolutionarily speaking. At a certain point, when we began to walk upright and use tools more and more, we started to incorporate animal products, specifically flesh foods, and then also eventually got into cooking. I don't know how many years ago, but some estimates are like 500,000 years ago when cooking began. And that in and of itself brought some problems as well as some benefits. Our ancestors were able to concentrate and reduce the amount of food they were taking in, so they had higher nutrient-dense food, although it was definitely lacking in certain nutrients. But we're assuming that throughout time our ancestors were still consuming a large amount of raw food along with that, because they weren't necessarily cooking everything. They didn't have pots and pans or double boilers or all these other things to cook or even overcook their foods. So eventually we come to modern humans, and we have several distinct differences between apes that we see around us today, like the chimpanzees, bonobos, and then to a lesser degree the gorillas and orangutans. And for many of the points that I talk about in this video, I've got articles and links below if you want to check out some of the references that I'm bringing up here in this video. So the major difference in terms of the alterations is in our gut, in our lower digestive tract. So our large intestine has definitely shrunk, and then our small intestine has increased in size, or has become larger in total volume that it can hold as compared to our large intestine. Whereas in all the apes, all the great apes, the chimpanzees, bonobos, gorillas, orangutans, they have a large intestine than their small intestine, and then it's the opposite with us. We actually have our small intestine is 2 times larger, a little more than 2 times larger than our large intestine, whereas in the apes it's the other way around. So this shows that because of the higher nutrient density that we can get from animal foods, because they're so dense in fat-soluble items and as well as the fats and proteins, and then also the cooking has reduced it, and also just general fruit processing, which breaks food down into more assimilable forms, just chopping, tearing, and in a more modern time it's the forms of juicing, fermenting, and blending that can reduce plant material as well as animal material down to a more concentrated form that we get more nutrition out of it without having to do so much work digesting it. And so because we also had that saving of time in terms of digesting and saving energy, this allowed us to develop a much larger brain. And humans have a much larger brain in comparison to their gut, their whole digestive tract, than any other animal in the wild, and especially so in comparison to the great apes. The largest ape the ape with the largest brain to gut ratio is the gorilla, which has a very large gut because it processes a lot of green shoots and leaves. Less so on the fruit size, because fruit is much more easily digestible than high fibrous greens. So when we look at our digestive tract, because it's had the shrinking of the large intestine, we can't digest quite as much large of a volume of fruit and vegetable matter as our ancestors that were apes could. And because of this, we can't thrive on a strictly plant-based raw diet for extreme long periods of time, and especially not over several generations. An interesting look at a family was done by Dr. Stanley Bass, and it was actually, he was looking at it through the perspective of the family's sort of personal doctor, physician / health consultant, Dr. Curzio. And what they saw was that this family, or mother and father that had a few children, became natural hygienists back in the 30s. I think it was 1936. They went into a natural hygiene program. And then they raised their children from a very young age on a natural hygiene diet. And then those children had children and they raised them on natural hygiene. So this is looking at 3 generations and the effect that it had on their health. And basically it was really only 2 generations, because the parents that first started and got their children on it didn't give birth to the children on the natural hygiene diet. But it was 2 generations, and within that, even that one jump of 1 generation of children being raised completely on the natural hygiene diet, Dr. Curzio found that there was a number of problems that were occurring in that first group of children, or the first children that were born from that second tier of the natural hygienists. And so because he was a proponent of natural hygiene, he was looking at all the things that were going on there, and he stuck to the foundational philosophy, but had to make some alterations to their diet, and he increased the green intake to get more of the minerals and other proteins and other things that are more dense than the greens as compared to the fruit. He lowered the fruit. He also increased the consumption of nuts and seeds, and he also actually had to bring in some raw fermented cheese and some raw egg yolks to help them overcome these deficiencies, and then he brought those back out to help the children regain their health. But then they went back to this vegan diet, which is interesting. But it's more interesting to note that they could not thrive, these children that were born into the natural hygiene lifestyle, they couldn't thrive on a very high fruit diet. So they had nearsightedness, what they call pigeon-chested, which is sort of where the bone in the chest is sticking out, protruding from the chest, and sticks out almost like the way a pigeon holds its chest out. But this is actually just a problem with the development and structure of the bone. But they also had problems in their arches, their teeth, and some other issues throughout their body, as well as hernias. They were born with hernias. So this is not to spread fear, but just the reality of the fact of what was going on with these people that were sticking to the diet quite strictly, and the results that they had from raising children and giving birth to children in that way. So the doctor was able to reverse some of these symptoms through the changes in diet, adding more mineral-dense greens in. He was actually advising them to consume a salad a day as well as a green blended salad every day, because you can get a larger quantity of greens blended into the diet. And then they were only having, I think, 1 fruit meal a day and then more nuts and seeds. This is interesting because this is the only sort of multi-generational study or example that is available out there that was really kept track of quite strictly, because this family was using this doctor as a health consultant for almost a monthly basis for 30 years or more. It really shows that they were keeping very strict with their diet, and they were having great results in other areas for sure. The children were very attentive and very focused, but like I mentioned, they did have certain problems that came up that had to be addressed, and this high fruit diet didn't seem to work, and there's very few people that succeed on it and live a long life and have healthy children, and it goes on down the line for long periods of time. And if we look at our species history for the past several million years, we can see that no one's ever consumed, since that time as being apes, such a high fruit diet and being able to be successful as a species. Those people that would have tried that would have died off, if anyone did. And what we see today is large groups of people in these different subgroups of fruitarianism attempting this type of diet and expounding certain things about it, and there's certain health benefits that come from it, but it is definitely an experiment. It's not something that is time-tested yet, and I'm not against any results coming from it. If, say, 50 years down the road, there's so much evidence that people are succeeding on this long-term and having really healthy children for 2 or 3 generations, I'd be very much the first person to retract these statements.